You were probably really excited when Apple released the Studio display because it meant you no longer had to get a small loan of $1 billion to go buy an Apple branded display. Now, I really wanted to pick up the display but made the decision not to just because it falls short in a couple categories.
That's right, I said that 12 months ago, and look at me here, being a hypocrite, buying an Apple Studio display, and now titling a video recommending it. So what happened, why have my thoughts changed, and why do I think the Apple Studio display is a good deal? Well, it comes down to three things: convenience, color, and comparability. But firstly, for context, I'm a cinematographer, colorist, and editor based in Melbourne, and those two first things in my workflows are the biggest reasons to why I sold my dual LG 32UL950-W monitors, which I like to call the Budget Pro Display XDRs, and swapped them both out for the single Apple Studio display, and specifically I picked up the one with the height adjustable stand. Let's begin with convenience. My daily driver is an M1 Max 2021 MacBook Pro, which I keep docked on my setup 90% of the time, and I really only undock whenever I'm going out and about. Like many, my last setup consisted of plugging my one cable into a Thunderbolt TS3 Plus dock from CalDigit, where my Mac was connected to my two 32-inch Thunderbolt displays with my Kanto YU4 speakers as a speaker setup, as well as Ethernet and a webcam. In the end, there was a lot of peripherals connected. Now, the problem with this was that because my MacBook was connected to a third-party dock and multiple third-party peripherals, every time I were to start up the MacBook, sometimes things wouldn't even start up at all. I'd have to go underneath the desk and repower everything, take out a plug and put it back in again, or things were just really slow to turn on. And the big issue with that is when I'm just trying to sit down at my desk, get started on my workday, and get a lot of work done, this was a big frustrating thing to have to deal with on a daily basis and sometimes on an hourly basis, because whenever my MacBook would go to sleep, it would essentially have to do this whole process again, and everything was just not reliable. With the Studio display, all those issues I mentioned are pretty much non-existent. I plug in one cable, the display lights up, I tap on my keyboard just to wake the computer, it's almost instant on, like the display is a computer itself. I have a camera built in, so gone is that old Logitech webcam, and although the camera is not 12K Dolby Vision HDR, when I'm just doing phone calls all the time, I much prefer having something that always works rather than making my skin look absolutely amazing, which I guess it never does whenever I'm on Zoom webcam calls and those things like that. It gets the job done and always works when I have to jump into meetings up to 10 times a day. It's something that you just need to forget about when you're working a lot. So with the one cable I do plug into my Mac with the Studio display, I get two Thunderbolt 2 ports, one SD card slot, a HDMI port, which I honestly really don't use that much, and then 3 additional fast USB slots in the back of the monitor, which I plug in my T7 SSDs into all the time and completely edit off of in DaVinci Resolve, so the ports are definitely not slow and really do keep up with the drive speeds that are on my SSD. Which brings me to the biggest element that is now missing from my old setup, and that is the Thunderbolt 3 dock. The biggest issue I had with it was that it only delivers up to 87 watts of power, and my MacBook Pro, which is the 14-inch along with the 16-inch one, actually requires up to 96 watts of power, I believe it is, which means there's definitely a power deficiency when it came with that old Thunderbolt dock. Now, the solution to that is that I could have purchased the new TS4 Plus dock. In Australia, that's $700+, which just gives me a few extra ports plus that option for charging. I might get it in the future, but honestly, it's a huge waste of money in my opinion, especially when you just are looking to get a bit of port expansion. The Apple Studio display passes through 96 watts of power straight to the MacBook Pro, which solves all those problems and really enabled me to get rid of that Thunderbolt dock. The Studio's display speakers are also so convenient, and although they don't compare quality-wise to my Kanto YU4 speakers, they still sound great, and I use them a lot more frequently compared to the Kantos for casual music listening, but most oftenly for just doing simple editing for vocal cuts when I don't want to wear headphones. It's a very handy, nice to have feature with the display, and they don't sound awful compared to the other monitors out there, like my old LGs, which I just rarely use those speakers on those. They were completely unusable. Plus, one great benefit of having speakers and a mic in the Studio display is that I can just take phone calls whenever they come through. With Wi-Fi calling linked up with continuity on macOS and my iPhone, running the latest software, it means that whenever a call comes through, I don't have to fish out for my iPhone and get AirPods out. All the mics and everything are working, and because everything is native, I can just take a call straight away. I opted for the height adjustable stand as well, which comes in incredibly useful with my standing desk setup, although definitely not necessary, as I do believe this part of the studio display is the most overpriced. I think you can just get away with using a desk shelf like this one from Oaky Wood, and if you're not as tall as me and you don't stand up at your desk setup as much as I do, you can just go with a normal stand setup and save yourself $400 or however much it costs. The display itself also has some incredibly useful features that all of us Mac users are very well accustomed to. That includes auto dimming, brightness control and volume control straight from the keyboard, which is something that is just completely gone when you have a third-party monitor. So this really helps, especially with brightness when you're working late into the night. And that wraps up on convenience. Now let's move on to one of the main reasons why, or if not the main reason why I bought this monitor, and a huge factor that you should consider too, and that is color. I've really ramped up the amount of projects I'm coloring and editing these days, where you can find me behind my desk color grading and editing either my own footage or a client or creator's project. As a result, when doing a lot of this work on my old LG displays, despite color calibrating them, setting them to the right settings and recalibrating them every few months, they would always never be consistent with how I wanted them to be viewed on other Apple devices and just other devices in general, like my LG C1 OLED display. Color consistency was definitely a big factor that was wrong here. It got to a point where I was genuinely exporting dozens and dozens of projects just to check every single time I made some adjustments that the color was right, and I looked at them on other displays just to make sure that everything matched up. And yes, I could have just used my MacBook screen, but it's just too small to natively color grade on. Plus, I much prefer keeping it docked, so all that wasted time was genuinely slowing down my workflow and really impacting my ability to not only have the confidence in my work and grade, and thus as a cinematographer, but sucked out valuable time out of my day constantly looking at my work from other displays. Not to mention the eye strain I would constantly go through when looking at my work on the LG display, then airdropping it to my iPhone, and then looking and pixel peeping to see where things were wrong. It was just a nightmare. So if you do creative work and you rely on color accuracy for your output, seriously consider this guy despite the steep relative price compared to other monitors out there, because it will save you time and, more importantly, your sanity in the end. Other notable mentions to include is that it's one of the only displays out there that has a 5K resolution panel, so text is so sharp, the quality of the glass makes it leaps and bounds more enjoyable to view content on, even if it's just emails. Not to mention that the Apple Studio display has a glossy glass finish on the front of the panel compared to a lot of other cheap plastic matte displays that the other third-party manufacturers make. The bezels are definitely thicker compared to my old LG display, and the screen size is notably smaller at 27 inches versus my old 32-inch monitors, which I do miss this screen size at times, but I've definitely adjusted to it. Those slight sacrifices are really nothing in comparison when viewing the monitor in person, side by side compared to your more common panel that's under $1,000. The display also gets really bright at 600 nits, which is technically a little bit brighter compared to the non-HDR operating levels that the Pro Display XDR gets to, but as mentioned, being able to dim the display is a huge thing, especially how easy it is with the keyboard. In short, the color accuracy in combination with the sharp 5K panel and brightness really make this display unbeatable at the price, but this makes it a good deal, as I've titled this video, if all of these features are important to you. They sure are as important to me, because I want to make sure that the footage I'm working so hard to capture out and about looks just as I intended to on the display that I spend so much time editing and coloring on. And finally, comparability, the most contentious topic about this monitor. There are hundreds of other 4K displays out there that you can probably go out and buy, and in fact, you can probably go out and get 4 of them before you even get close to the price of the base studio display. So, are they a better deal? Well, if the convenience and color features I mentioned before aren't important to you, then sure, they are a much better deal. If you don't need to worry about color issues and you're perfectly happy with a typical display like my old LGs and how they interact with your Mac, then you're absolutely right. But if those features I did mention are in fact important to you, like color accuracy and convenience, then quite frankly, there are really no other displays out there at this price that compare with the Studio display, with the obvious exception of the older LG ultrafine displays, which aren't exactly the same panels. As shared by Max Urev, there are some noticeable quality differences. most notably with peak brightness and contrast, plus they don't nearly look as good in the design department, nor have great built-in quality speakers. All considered, if you want to have the confidence that your content that you create and shot will look consistent and great on the display you look at for dozens of hours a week, plus if you want to completely minimize the friction of being able to just jump into your work when sitting at your desk, rather than being distracted by little glitches and setup issues, then I have to stand by and say that the Apple Studio display is a good deal, and compared to what I said a year ago, well, I eat my words. So as a result, I found that you can only really comment on the value of a product based off of your needs, your experiences, and actually using it, and therefore seeing if it has a productive impact on your workflow. In saying all that, I've found that the Apple Studio display is a really good deal for me, but I'm curious to hear what you think it is for you. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching, have a wonderful day, stay safe, and of course, do take care.